Chairperson, as workers and families across the state, they're only too well aware of the cost of living crisis and that it's far from over. The rate of inflation has eased, but prices haven't fallen, and costs remain far too high for many households. For so many, wages have failed to keep up with rising prices, and households have tried their best to adjust their spending. But many of them, as we read in today's papers, have fallen into real hardship. 1 in 8 can't even pay their energy bills. People don't expect the government to shield them completely from every single price increase. But nor do they expect the government itself to make matters worse by increasing prices. And that's exactly what we have in this Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael government. And that is what we are debating here this evening. A government that plans to hike fuel prices twice next month. It is simply a reality, Minister, that many workers and families, whether they're travelling to their place of work or for a hospital appointment or to leave their children to school or to visit a loved one, in many areas they have no option other than to use a car. According to AA, the price of petrol has increased by 16 cents compared to August 21 and diesel by 21 cents. And in the past number of weeks, the cost of fuel has steadily increased, not just because of the market, but because your government has increased it on the 1st of September. Households are seeing this at the pumps and they're feeling it in their pockets. So on the 1st of September, Minister, you as a government, in your wisdom, decided to increase the price of petrol at the pumps by 7 cents per litre, and you hiked up the price of diesel by another 5 cents per litre. So we're now seeing prices creeping up to the €2 per litre mark, and this price creep is happening as households continue to grapple with all of the rest: the high energy bills, the soaring mortgage costs, the unaffordable rents and the unaffordable childcare fees. And despite these pressures, what's the government determined to do? You're determined to make matters worse. Because what you plan next month is not 1 but 2 tax hikes on petrol and diesel, pushing petrol and diesel prices up for workers and for families. And this government will push the prices higher on the 11th of October and again on the 31st of October. On the 11th, the government plans to put up the price of petrol by 2 cents and the price of diesel by 3 cents. On the 31st of October, you plan as a government to push up the price of petrol further by another 8 cents per litre and the price of diesel by another 6 cents per litre. And you've legislated for all of this. It's now already law. So taken together, the government's drive to increase fuel prices will add hundreds of euros to travel costs of households per annum, pushing fuel prices closer towards the €2 per litre at the pumps mark. So workers and families will rightly ask themselves why. As the cost of living remains so high, this government is determined to make matters worse for them, to make the school run more expensive, to take more money out of workers' pockets as they travel to work, and to increase the cost of citizens who visit their loved ones. In March, I warned the government that these rates of tax increases needed to be kept under close review, as the risk of further price rises at the pumps remained a real prospect. The government didn't heed that warning, so it is time that they do. The government needs to change course, and that's what our motion calls for. You need to understand the financial pressures households are under and scrap your out-of-touch plan to increase petrol and diesel not once but twice next month. So this motion calls on the government to scrap their plan to hike the price excise on petrol and diesel first on the 11th of October and again on the 31st of October. Both planned pricing hikes must be scrapped. So workers and families, Minister, continue to struggle under a cost of living crisis, and the government should be supporting households, not making matters worse. And that's the simple thing about it. If you understand where people were at, you would understand that many are pushed to the pin of their collar, and sitting round the cabinet table, you have decided to launch 2 tax increases on petrol and diesel on workers and families across the state. Minister, I tell you, what workers do not need is the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael petrol and diesel tax hikes. What they need is a break. So I'm calling on you and all deputies here to support Sinn Féin's motion before the House this evening.
5 minutes. The motion we have here this evening before us is about giving people a chance in the most difficult of circumstances. And I'm calling on TDs across the constituencies, across the North West and the border constituencies particularly, which have a particular problem in regard to this because of the issues with the 2 jurisdictions being so close to each other, unfortunately. to support this motion, and for government to support this motion, for government to recognise that this is a situation you simply cannot stand over. We cannot have a situation where people who are under so much pressure are looking at a further increase in fuel costs in October of this year. We've seen the people at the gates today in regard to childcare and the costs there. Every day there's something else. Every day people are feeling the pinch all over the place. We see interest rates going up. We see the price of rent. We see the price of, obviously, fuel and heating oil. Everything that people are buying is going up, 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 up. And this is an opportunity for government to have a little bit of solidarity with people and say, look, in the circumstances, we recognise that it is not appropriate to bring in these increases, and in October to withdraw them. So I'm asking you, Minister, to ensure that you do that government step back from this and scrap these proposed increases. Yesterday, yes, it was yesterday morning, we were in Donegal where we met IBEC and a lot of the businesses in the border region. And one of the big issues we have in the border region is that we have two jurisdictions right beside each other. And for filling stations all along the border, they're looking at a situation where already we have fuel in the north that's parity or maybe a little below, and they're afraid that if we continue to see fuel rising in the south, you're going to have more and more people crossing the border, and that is actually going to close those businesses. So, we have to recognise that government has a responsibility to ensure that we can keep businesses like that open, that we can ensure that the price of fuel is adequate for people to be able to manage so that they can do their ordinary day's work, that they can go out and bring their children to school. There's also, of course, the issue for the delivery of goods around the country, so much of which is done in the white vans to our shops and all of those places. All of these fuel increases have an impact on that and have an impact of the cost of living further down the road. So, Minister, what we need to see is action from government. We need to see action which will actually make a difference. Now, in October, you have the opportunity to scrap this particular price increase that you're looking at. We're not saying, that you need to scrap all of them. As time moves on, if the price of oil on the international market comes down, we have to look at that as things change. But at the moment, things have changed in the opposite direction. It has gone up. And if you bring in these price increases, we will see fuel prices probably going over €2 a litre. And people simply can't afford that. And you need to recognise that. And you need to cut your cloth to the measure to ensure that you can deliver something for the ordinary people out there who are working hard, who are getting up in the morning, who are trying to go to work, who are trying to manage, and many of whom who don't have any other options. Certainly in many parts of the country, as indeed the Caherlock will understand, there is no public transport. There is no way of doing it. We don't have the rail, we don't have the Luas, we don't have anything else to bring us to work. People have to get into their car and drive. And for many people, the continued increase in fuel costs is having a really detrimental effect, because every time they go to the pump and put in whatever amount they normally put in, maybe it was €30 a year ago, now they have to put in 50 to get the same distance. And that's the reality that people are looking at. So, Minister, our motion is very clear. Don't bring in these increases in October, and have a little bit of solidarity with the ordinary people out there who are doing their best and who are suffering so hard because of the continued cost of living crisis that we have across the country. So, I hope that you will see sense, and the government will see sense, and recognise that this is not the time to increase fuel prices for people out there.
So, Minister, I just want to reaffirm the points that have been made by Deputy Doherty and Deputy Kenny. And as you know, I'm a TD also in the same region as both of them. And you will know the huge public transport deficits that we have in the region. The reality is that if you are working, if you're studying, if you're trying to run a business, public transport sadly isn't an option for most people in our county. You have to have a car. The electric infrastructure just really isn't there. It's not a possibility. So, if you add on, the whole issue of carbon tax that is supposed to punish people for not taking better alternatives. Well, in places like where we're from, you don't have those alternatives. They're not real alternatives around you. If you look at, it's not just in isolation that these increases are there. You add them on to energy costs, electricity costs, food increases. The people that we represent, everywhere they turn, they're getting squeezed. People are really struggling and making tough decisions, in terms of their lives. With this issue now, it's dread, when you talk to these families, when they're looking at that petrol pump and it's going up and up from week to week, up and up, back up towards that level, that dreaded sort of €2 level again. So we're appealing to you to listen to us, particularly from the parts of the country where we come from, around the border, rural areas where people have to get by, and this difference, is huge for people. People, say to me, they hear about reports about, surplus and full employment. We've never had it so good. That's not what they see in their lives. That's not their lived experience. What they see is that they just can't make the numbers add up every week. And all of these components together, so you have it in your power in this issue here not to make that even worse. So we are appealing to you to support the motion, support the call that we're making, and to try and do what you can. Obviously, there's wider issues, but we're focusing on this one tonight, and we're saying to you, hear what we're telling you, and do what's right.
Quinlivan.
Minister, the cost of living in this state has spiralled out of control. For many workers and families, despite being on a wage, they are struggling to get by bill, week to week. With the near continuous news of further price rises, it is all but impossible for the average worker to have any disposable income. Those that are renting face the ominous threat of eviction, and if they are to seek new rented accommodation in Limerick, the cost of renting is beyond the reach of most workers. For a family renting a 3-bedroom house in Limerick, the average cost is $1,699. For a single person renting a 1-room apartment, it stands at $1,177 per month. I'm sure you'll agree these are colossal prices to be paying for rented accommodation. Those who are fortunate enough to own their own home have seen their mortgage interest rates rise, in some cases 10 times this year, and rise further, and now they face these additional fuel costs. In Limerick, there are some fantastic companies who are large-scale employers. I think the likes of 3 Ireland, Johnson & Johnson, Edward Life Sciences and Regeneron, amongst many others. These companies in the main are based in industrial estates located near the suburbs of the city. Whilst there are bus services, they're infrequent and unreliable. The morning and evening traffic in the likes of Castletroy and Raheen is testament to the growing number of commuters travelling to these locations for work. Commuters, many of whom are renters, who are also paying over $1,100 per month, and their rent can't afford any new costs. These workers and families have seen the price of petrol and diesel increase in the past months and are told this is a necessary cost due to rise further. Between March and August, the cost of petrol and diesel has risen by 7.6% and 9.9% respectively. There was a 7 cent and a 5 cent increase in the cost of petrol and diesel started this month, with further increases scheduled for the 11th of October for 2 cents of petrol and 2.5 cents per diesel. Yet another increase scheduled then for the 31st of October of 8 cents per petrol and 6 cents for diesel. This has placed an unnecessary further burden on workers and families in this state. It is placing an unnecessary burden on those who have no option but to use a car to travel to work, school or college. You must realise that pursuing these increases at this time of increasing cost of living chips away further at the income available to families. It chips away at disposable income. The fuel price increase on their own will add hundreds of euros in annual fuel costs for workers and families, and yet you persevere with this regardless. People will be faced with the prospect of paying nearly €2 per litre when they fill up their vehicle. I urge you to reconsider. I urge you to stop this increase scheduled for the 11th and 31st of October, and I urge you to stand up for the average worker and family like we are trying to do here tonight.
Ryan.
I'm here today to speak to Sinn Féin's vital motion of reversal of planned fuel prices increases, and I'd like to thank Deputy Doherty and his team for bringing this to the floor at all. Rising petrol and diesel prices are adding increased stress on families during a cost of living crisis, Minister. Workers are struggling to afford the fuel to get them to work, not to mention students and their families with long commutes to and from schools and universities who can barely make ends meet. Having already added 7 and 5 cents per litre in petrol and diesel on September the 1st, this government plans to add insult to injury by adding 2 increases of 8 and 6 cents by the end of October. Minister, these planned increases bring the average cost of petrol per litre to almost €2 and diesel around €1.90, heaping more and more misery on families and workers. Of course, let us not forget haulage firms and service providers that are the backbone of our economy. Their businesses will be in dire straits with these increases. I and my staff are getting calls from local hauliers and businesses facing enormous struggles to keep people in employment due to rising fuel costs. As you are aware, Minister, this has a knock-on effect on our local economy. Increased food costs and adding to the ever-increasing overheads that many small and local businesses already face. In my own constituency of County Kildare, people do not have the option of public transport. And Minister, all previous speakers have told you this, and we'll have to rely on cars to get around. That is the reality of rural Ireland, Minister. Sinn Féin have been calling repeatedly for government action on fuel costs to aid struggling families and businesses. Well, I have news for you, Minister. Fuel prices increases will make things worse, not better. You know that, and I know that. Government must reverse its plans to increase petrol and diesel prices on October the 11th and 31st and stop adding to an already crippling cost of crisis. It's the worst cost of living crisis we've ever had, and you're sitting there thinking it's okay to add more to it. I urge the Minister and his government to adopt the Sinn Féin motion and change tactic on this issue. Thank you, Count Corley.
Thanks, Count Corley. Minister, we need to see action from this government as soon as possible on the cost of fuel and the cost of living. Sinn Féin have constantly raised this issue here in the Dáil. All this government is doing is driving people into poverty. Do the government actually realise what people are going through during this cost of living crisis? The rising cost of fuel is not an isolated issue. It is part of a broader cost of living crisis that is sweeping across Ireland. The cost of rent, housing, food, utilities and other essentials are continually on the rise. The cumulative effect of these increases is putting immense pressure on families across the country. I'll tell you about one of my constituencies who contacted me a couple of weeks ago, and she was refused the school uniform allowance for her child after being means tested. She is on invalidity pension and her husband's wage put them over the limit. But they're living hand to mouth with the rent cost, which was not taken into account, along with electricity costs, food costs, fuel costs to keep their car on the road. They couldn't figure out where to get the money from to purchase their child's uniform. Around the time of being means tested, their account had 87 cents in it, until her husband's next payday. Her husband is paid monthly, and after all their bills are paid, that's the standard amount that they are left with in their account, 87 cents each month, Minister. As we head into winter, people are going to have to start putting oil in their tanks again to heat their homes. This is another bill for people already under huge financial pressure. Older people are afraid to turn on the heat because of the cost, going around their own house with a coat and a scarf on them, or going to bed in the middle of the day to keep warm. Definitely not the way to be treating our older people. While at the same time, this government plans to increase the price of petrol and diesel twice in October. Ordinary workers and families can't afford these hikes in the middle of a cost of living crisis. These price increases, if they go ahead, will add hundreds of euro to average annual fuel costs. That is why you must reverse these planned increases. Our Minister, do you really know what is going on the ground and how people are struggling?
Brown, Deputy Maiden and Deputy O'Murray in that order.
Minister, your government has announced planned increases in fuel prices that will only exacerbate the already burdened pockets of ordinary workers and families across the country. Petrol and diesel prices have experienced a steady rise since May, but it's the recent sharp increase that will have a significant impact on the pockets of the public. These planned increases come at an untimely moment when individuals are still grappling with economic uncertainties caused by the global pandemic. Moreover, many people rely heavily on personal vehicles for commuting purposes, making them highly vulnerable to rising fuel costs, forcing individuals to bear this additional financial strain. It's not just unfair, but causes unnecessary stress given the current cost of living crisis. The proposed 10-cent increase per litre in petrol and 8-cent increase per litre in diesel will push these fuels closer to the €2 litre by October's end. Such a steep hike will undoubtedly impact individuals' budgets significantly, particularly those who rely on their vehicles for work or essential travel purposes. The overall cost of living will rise as transportation costs trickle down into other sectors, such as food production, small businesses, and even public services like healthcare. Higher fuel prices can also prove detrimental to various sectors, such as transportation, agriculture and small businesses. Transportation costs will escalate substantially, increasing expenses throughout supply chains. Farmers who rely heavily on machinery powered by diesel engines will face higher operational costs, which may result in decreased agricultural productivity or increased produce prices for consumers. Small businesses that depend on regular deliveries or transport services may struggle to absorb elevated transportation expenses without passing them on to customers. These planned fuel price increases are not only untimely but also a burden on ordinary workers and families who are already facing economic challenges. The consequences of these hikes range from increased living costs to negative impacts on various sectors of the economy, and they should be scrapped.
Minister, I think there's clearly we have a different perspective in relation to the challenges that are facing people. Many people would say to us that they're facing into a financial cliff, and they're getting nearer and nearer to that. You seem to be, and your government seem to be, have the position that you're steaming on ahead, clearly powered by hot air in relation to your policies. So you're saying to us that we have to, and families that are out there that are suffering at the moment, the key element of this is that there's going to be 2 increases in the month of October. You're saying, let's wait till the budget process. We're already in the budget process. Every day we're contacted by families and individuals and advocacy groups and all the rest about the crisis that they're facing, and that we're already in the part of that. The budget is being written as we speak, but what we're saying at the moment is that families can't handle another 2 increases in the 1 month, and that's basically what the elements of this is saying. Petrol and diesel prices have already been increasing steadily this year. We know that. Like any of us that travel, we know that. But the difficulty, what we're saying, Minister, is that while people maybe living in Dublin have an alternative, that there might be transport, and that's not always the case in everywhere. If you're going to a job, in many cases, you need that transport. So what we're saying, Minister, is this has to stop. You have to wake up to what families are facing, and they're facing a crisis. So we need to do more, Minister, and what we're asking you to do is do the common sense thing and stop this increase. Is that too much to ask? I don't think it is. I don't think, anyone that's listening at home, the governments are saying that there's plenty of money in the thing. Is it about this thing that, the higher the increase that people aren't going to get into their cars? There's no one sitting outside their driveway driving, revving up their car a couple of hours a day and all the rest. They're using that petrol, they're using that diesel to get from A to B. And people are suffering and worried, really, and worrying and going to bed at night, wondering how they're going to get the money to get into their job. And it's not just workers, it's students, it's people going to childcare and so on. So, do we have to, do an ABC stuff here, Minister? There's a problem out there. It can be solved. You have it in your power to do that, and we're appealing you tonight in this motion to do just that, to stop the increases. I'd ask you to reflect on that. Good morning.
Minister, just so you won't be too upset by what you're listening to from this side of the House, we'll give you credit for one thing. You have given payments to families, but what you gave on one hand, you took back twice as much on the other. The 3 parties in this malfunctioning government have really lost touch with the pressures that people are really under out there right now. And things are bad enough right now. Inflation has increased to an extent that for many, work, even those that get up early, as you keep talking about, it doesn't pay the bills anymore for them. We've had childcare providers outside the gates today who are working on fees that were frozen at last year's rates in order to get core funding. Many of those businesses are now under undue pressure because of the impact of inflation since then, and many are going to go out of business. We have community workers in the area of health and social care who are the backbone of Tipperary and who are due to go strike next month because they've been left behind by the government who failed to address the disparity in pay they experience. They're calling for you to take action on their behalf, not to make matters worse for them by hiking the cost of motor fuel any further than you already have. What about the many mortgage holders who are paying vastly more each month alongside the increased cost of virtually everything, and you think it's all right to put more pressure on them? Food is up, energy is up, the number of electricity customers falling into arrears is up, yet you think these people can afford to pay even more to put fuel in their car so they can drive to work. put in their day's work, drive home, and at the end of the week or at the end of the month see a vastly devalued paycheck go into the account to pay out even more at the pumps. By the end of October, you'll have increased the price of petrol by 10 cents per litre and the price of diesel by more than 8 cents per litre, pushing both closer to €2 per litre. And now we're facing the onset of winter. People will need to put more money towards heating their homes. But the truth is, you're making it even more and more difficult. Let me warn you this, Minister, that it will have an effect. And I remind you that whatever one-off payments you may include in the budget will for many be offset by the hikes you intend to impose on people throughout the month of this October. And the longer you are in government, the worse things keep getting for those struggling with the cost of living. And there's only one thing for it, and it's time for change.
I'd like to commend Pierce Doherty's motion to all the TDs across the House, especially to my fellow TDs from County Wexford. The Minister of Finance urgently needs to reverse the planned decision to raise petrol and diesel prices in October this year. These purposely risen price increases will add to the already substantial living costs to ordinary families. Wages have stagnated. Food inflation is running at 6.6% and rising. Rents on year in my own county has increased by 19.5%, and fuel inflation is running at 16.4%. That's even before the government planned 2 increases in October. It is plain as day that it's getting harder and harder for families and workers to get by. Most are living from week to week. Hiking the cost of fuel will have an immediate effect of increasing prices across the board. Everyone knows these planned increasing costs will be passed on to the consumers, one way or the other, whether through transport or delivery costs, etc. This will add hundreds of euros to the average family budget and wipe out their disposable income. And God help you if you live in rural Ireland, as these increases will have a disproportionate unfair increase compared to the rest of the population. The fact is there is no alternative to using your car in rural Ireland to go to work, to school, to your local sports club or leisurely trips. Small farm holdings are faced with huge extra costs. Now, the government say they acknowledge that there are a cost of living crisis. However, one of their solutions is to increase fuel prices. How can this be so? It is a total contradiction. The government must realise that people are at the edge of managing their incomes and salaries. People are on fixed incomes, pensioners, care workers, apprentices. And what's more, they cannot keep absorbing the current cost of living crisis. Small family businesses are closing every day due to our energy costs. However, Minister, there is still time to do the right thing. What the Minister can do immediately is cancel his plans to increase the price of petrol and diesel on the 11th of October. Cancel his plans to increase the price of petrol and diesel on the 31st of October. And if you truly want to help the cost of living crisis, then cancel this unnecessary burden and take it off the shoulders of ordinary workers, of men and women of this country, and give families a break. Second step, words of wisdom.
That's all I'm going to need. That's it. Look, in fairness, it's already been said, Minister. The fact is, what you're doing here with these increases in October is heaping pain on pain. Look, we can go through whether we're talking about the childcare workers, whether we're talking about people under pressure that haven't got any sort of plans from yourselves yet in relation to dealing with mortgages, dealing with rents, whether we're talking about the cost of shopping, whether we're talking about the CRU that doesn't even want the powers to be able to deal with the madness that you're dealing with in relation to energy providers. But really, you have an opportunity here where you can at least mitigate some of the pain they're dealing with. Because the fact is, we can talk about fossil fuel replacement, but the fact is, we don't even know how that Res 3 auction is going to go at this point in time. The government really needs to get its act together in relation to that. But let's be real. People are under severe pressure. You can help them out now. You need to make sure there are no increase to the cost of petrol and diesel, because people don't have a choice. They need to get in their car, and you could help them to make that slightly cheaper, slightly easier to deal with the cost of living crisis.
Thank you. I'd like to thank my colleagues for bringing forward this timely motion. In the past few weeks, we've watched fuel prices steadily increase. Petrol and diesel prices have increased by 7.6% and 9.9% respectively. This government seems hell-bent on ensuring that fuel prices hit the €2 mark as soon as possible. This government are planning 2 fuel hikes in October, and these price hikes are not happening in isolation. In the middle of a cost of living crisis, these prices are suffocating workers. These price hikes need to be stopped. It is ordinary workers and pensioners and vulnerable members of our society that will feel the brunt of these price hikes most. Some commentators say that these price hikes are needed to push more people to buy electrical vehicles, to push people to cycle and active transport. But the reality is that for the average person in Ireland, an electrical car is beyond their means. In the last year, the price of an electric car has jumped by 13%, and as a result, an electric car in Ireland now costs an average of €65,000. That's an enormous sum of money for ordinary people in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Last week I spoke to a young mother who works as a healthcare worker in a hospital here in Dublin. She told me why she doesn't use public transport despite having the choice. She said she goes to get to hospital, it takes her 20 minutes to drive versus over an hour on the bus. Getting public transport every day would add over 7 hours a week to her commute. We need to see this government delivering efficient public transport so that we can ease the congestion we are seeing across the city and start improving the quality of life for those living in the city. Many communities across my constituencies, like Pearse Street and Kevin Street, experience constant traffic congestion throughout the day. Many times of the day, they're like car parks. So, simply because the government and DCC have failed to put in effective public transport. DCC slowing down the lights simply won't work. Garmalgat.
And Deputy Doherty for bringing this motion to the House, and if I was in the humour I might commend the Minister for managing to spend 10 minutes and avoid the very context of the motion in his own remarks. I recall not so long ago, on the 1st of September, Corla, when people realised that their petrol costs had increased by 7 cents per litre and their diesel costs by 5 cents per litre, there was a genuine sense of frustration among many people who I spoke to. And then when they realised that this wasn't anything to do with Ukraine, it wasn't as a result of a blockage of the Suez Canal, it wasn't as a result of any of the other litany of excuses that are put forward. This was a decision by government. And as one of my constituents said, Minister, as one of my constituents said, it was the equivalent of government putting a tax on a loaf of bread. Because this is the thing that some of you on that side of the House don't recognise. For people in my constituency, driving a car isn't a luxury. It is essential for them in order to be able to get to work, to drive their kids to school because they can't access school transport in some instances, or even to drop their kids at a football game. So when you increase the cost of doing those things at a time when people are already struggling with energy costs that have just gone beyond what was once even imaginable, with insurance costs, with housing costs, whether it be rents or whether it be in mortgage costs, with the increasing costs of groceries. What you are doing is actually making people's lives more difficult. And the suggestion made again that this is anything to do with environmentalism or climate action is laughable. And what is your current proposal right now, Minister? Your current proposal is that on the 11th of October, you will increase petrol by 2 cents and diesel by 2.5 cents. And what's your proposal after that? It's that on the 31st of October, you will increase petrol again by a further 8 cents and you will increase diesel again by a further 6 cents. And all of that happening, all of these increases are happening at a time when fuel prices are increasing on their own anyway. So that is what the net result of your current trajectory is. It will push families to the absolute brink. It will push many of them into personal debt crisis, even those who a number of years ago would have considered themselves to be well off. It will push businesses in my constituency out of actual business. So it'll actually, there will be a cost to the economy in many communities as a result of this measure, unless you take action. And what we do know is, because you mentioned the measures you took in March, you mentioned some of the other measures that government have taken, we know that in every single one of those instances, it took Pearse Doherty or another Sinn Féin TD to bring a motion before this House in order to embarrass you to take action. I hope that this motion has the same effect on you, and I hope that we will see real, meaningful reductions in the cost of actually people travelling to their place of work. That's what people deserve, and that's what people are demanding in the budget.
Thank you.
Can Corley, and I want to thank all the speakers who spoke in favour of the motion tonight, because it is a really important motion, and as many people have talked about the middle of the cost of living crisis, so I'm not going to name all the parties. It was disappointing I didn't hear from any of the rural independents because they weren't here to contribute to the debate, but I'm sure they'll have plenty to talk about later on in relation to those issues. But the key issue here, the key.
Can I make a point of clarification? I came in here 22 minutes before I was to speak, and two groups before us hadn't spoken, so that's what happened.
And that's why I'm sorry that you weren't able to contribute to the debate, because I'm sure there would and that's why I pointed that I'm sorry that you weren't here to contribute to the debate, because I'm sure you would have a lot to add to it. So, Can Corley. But I do want to thank everybody for contributing to the contributing to the debate and supporting the motion. The government obviously have tabled their own amendment, which is disappointing. And really, what we're trying to get at here, and I've raised these points with the minister. You know, the minister was shouting over to Deputy Carthy and saying you supported this and all this. I can read you the transcripts, Minister. You're given the impression now that you set this date of the 31st of October because you wanted to review it. I put the question to you specifically at the Finance Committee, will you review this issue? Because if we remove excise duty from petrol and diesel at the current prices when we were dealing with the finance bill, it would be 191. But actually, if you continue along this trajectory, it will be at 196. I said it actually could go higher. And therefore, if it crept up close to €2, would you be willing to review it? You said no. You said no. You said, and I'll read it out your own words if you want. You said no. You said, I am legislating for this. This is what I want to do. And then you caveat, we keep everything under review. But you said you are not keeping this. The point is, we have made it very clear that this is the trajectory it could have went, that prices could have risen in the international markets, which is what has happened over the summer period. We know the reasons for that. And now we're seeing petrol and diesel creep up to where I suggested it could do, up to €2. And you have decided not to send a signal here tonight in relation to the two increases that you plan. Two increases. Not content with the increase in September, which the Dáil wasn't sitting to deal with, but a further increase of 2 cents and 2.5 cents on the 11th of October, and then a further increase again on the 31st of October. Many deputies here from border communities talked about the impact on individual businesses. Now, so I sat down with many retailers recently, and they come from some of the most deprived communities in our state, places like Lifford and Ballyshannon, places on the border. And the reality is, if there is a 10-cent excise duty and that's not reciprocated in the north through the British government, then it does make them unviable. Now, there is an issue here where maybe that the government aren't interested on the impact it will have around border communities, but there has to be an analysis in relation to what does excise duty do to businesses that are supporting jobs in areas that have got levels of deprivation that we don't see anywhere else in the state. At the core of this motion is a cost of living measure. The Minister was clapping himself on the back in relation to what they've done and what they've done over successive budgets. Minister, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, when inflation is still running at 6%, when prices are still going up, you're planning to put up the price of petrol and diesel. You did it in September, you're planning to do it on the 11th of October, you're planning to do it on the 31st of October, and that is madness as we creep up to €2 a litre at the pumps. So this motion is a sensible motion. It is about asking you not to proceed with that, to doing what I said to you back when we dealt with the finance bill at the early stage. If prices were creeping up at €2, then this needed to be kept under review. When you said no, I said this is exactly what has to happen. We're at that point now. These increases should not go ahead, and definitely not go ahead at this time. And I make the point again that this is another example of how out of touch this government is with where ordinary people are in terms of struggling with cost of living crisis. And I would just ask you to reflect on the fact that 1 in 8 people, 1 in 8 families can't pay their energy bill. How do you think they're going to feel when you increase the price of petrol twice in the next month?